Today we're going to talk about some major moves forward for the Build Back Better Act and a desperate stunt pulled by Kevin McCarthy. And I interview Beto O'Rourke about his bid for governor of Texas and his message for Greg Abbott over how he's dealt with the power grid and the issue of abortion. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're listening to No Lie. This past week, just days after Democrats passed the infrastructure package, House Democrats have also passed the Build Back Better Act by a vote of 220 to 213. And first and foremost, because our issue is that Democrats are incapable of selling their own achievements, here's what's in the bill. It extends the child tax credit for another year, meaning $300 per child. And it'll also be fully refundable for the lowest income families, meaning even those who don't earn enough to file a tax return can qualify for the credit. Universal pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds, 4 weeks of paid leave, $550 billion in climate investments, the biggest in history, primarily in the form of tax credits, $130 billion to expand Medicaid and reduce ACA premiums, which are expected to lower plans by $600 per year on average. Medicare will cover hearing benefits, seniors out-of-pocket drug expenses are capped at $2,000 per year, plus funds for affordable housing, elder care, free school meals, Pell Grants, and I know that Republicans are trying to brand this as some scary, massive communist spending bill, but what this bill is relief for regular families. It's just a mix of wildly populist provisions that help mostly working-class Americans. And most importantly, it is paid for. The last major hurdle among moderate Democrats in the House was the Congressional Budget Office, or CBO score, which would determine how much the bill would cost. And the CBO found that the cost of the Build Back Better Act would be $367 billion. And that would be offset by tax enforcement, which the Treasury Department estimated to bring in $480 billion, meaning the bill would result in a net deficit reduction of $113 billion. So not only is it paid for, but this is actually going to bring some relief on the debt as far as this bill is concerned. And granted, this thing still has to make it through the Senate, so it remains to be seen what stays and what goes, but still that doesn't mean we shouldn't take every opportunity to make sure that people are as familiar as possible with the bill for two reasons. First, most of the stuff will stay until the end, so we might as well get familiar with it anyway, and that's because, secondly, not selling it will create a messaging vacuum that Republicans will happily fill with lies. Remember, when the ACA passed, the GOP promised that it would lead to death panels. Death panels. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that my last visit to the hospital wasn't just 6 dudes sitting on a bench deciding if I live or die. So it's our responsibility to not make the same mistakes in the past and to make sure that we own the messaging on what will be the most transformative piece of legislation in our lifetimes. And with that said, as far as the opposition is concerned, of course Republicans are already trying to frame this as some huge burden for the deficit because the second a Democrat takes office, suddenly the same party that added $7.8 trillion to the debt becomes deficit hawks again. Fox Business actually published an article with this title: CBO, Biden's spending bill will add $367 billion to the deficit, not counting IRS tax enforcement plan. Not counting IRS tax enforcement, meaning costs will be high if you don't offset it with the revenue. If you take away the revenue parts, then the bill will only add to the deficit. If you were to only count your expenses and not your income, then your personal finances would look pretty shitty. Fox is trying to say that if you don't count the part where the bill pays for itself, then the bill won't pay for itself. Some real top-notch business news there from Fox Business. And beyond that, the bill's passage was momentarily derailed by Kevin McCarthy, who wanted his Mr. Smith Goes to Washington moment where he took the floor and spoke for over 8 hours, all in service of the noble pursuit of stopping a bill that would lower the cost of insulin and childcare for Americans. Yeah, I know people throw around the word hero, but Kevin McCarthy talking for 8 hours to block seniors from getting hearing aids might just be his most principled venture yet. Here's just 15 seconds of Kevin McCarthy's rambling that should pretty much let you know how the rest of his 8.5-hour speech went.
I talk about what made me a Republican. I was in the 6th grade. I turn on the TV. I watch Jimmy Carter have a sweater on and tell me to turn the heater down, that the best days were behind us. That as an American, I had to accept less. That wasn't how I was raised. You're celebrating it when inflation is at a 31% height. Gas prices. Thanksgiving, a border that in a few months breaks every record of the last 3 years combined.
Just errant synapses firing in his brain. This is like if the Facebook comment section of a Fox News article came to life. And by the way, not that McCarthy is a serious person to begin with, but you gotta love him wailing about inflation while filibustering a bill that 17 Nobel Prize-winning economists said would help ease inflation. So yeah, we couldn't possibly allow a bill that would help reduce inflation pass because of worries about inflation. Totally checks out. And just one last note here. I know politics now doesn't have the same draw that it did when Trump was president, and the entirety of politics was a car crash that we couldn't look away from. But we did a shit ton of work to get him out of office, and it's going to require a shit ton more to keep him and his influence out of office too. And this right here, this part, where we pass legislation and we have to let people know what's in it, know that their vote was worth it, that their lives will be better because of it, that government can work, this is what will determine what happens in 2022. We don't even have to guess what happens if we don't do the work because we already know. I mentioned this earlier. When Democrats passed the ACA, which at that point was arguably the most transformative legislation of our lifetimes, Republicans seized on the messaging vacuum and decimated Democrats in the midterms. That is what's at stake right now. And so our approach moving forward obviously has to be multi-pronged. We have to be able to tout our accomplishments and push back on the inevitable barrage of culture war bullshit. But what we can't do is allow there to be a vacuum that Republicans will then fill with disinformation. Because if we leave an opening the size of an inch, they will wrestle their way in and throw an ungodly amount of shit against the wall to see what sticks. And I can promise you that instead of the midterms being about universal pre-K and lower drug prices and affordable childcare and the biggest climate change investment in history, it'll be about some iteration of critical race theory or Marxism or migrant caravans, or whatever else they can latch their jaws onto. We do this, we pass the Build Back Better Act, and then we spend the next 350 days making sure that every single American knows what's in it. See those new roads? That's the Democrats. That new internet, faster internet, Democrats. Lower insulin prices, Democrats. Childcare, Democrats. Universal pre-K, Democrats. ACA subsidies, Democrats. $300 child tax credit checks, Democrats. The same way that Trump seared his slogans into our brains, only this won't be blatant xenophobia. It won't be empty promises about a half-built wall that Mexico didn't pay for. It'll be stuff that makes your life better, because that's the fundamental difference. Their slogans are to scare you. Ours are to show you that government can work for you. It is fear versus hope. We've got the better agenda, we've got the better policies, we've got the better message. We just need to make sure that people can hear it. To check out my interview with Beto O'Rourke about his bid for governor of Texas and his message for Greg Abbott over how he's dealt with the power grid and the issue of abortion, click the thumbnail right here on this screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel.